Good morning, everyone, and welcome to IELTS Listening Acuity. This is me, 𝐻𝐻𝐸𝐺 𝐻𝐸, joining you from 𝐁𝐼THs Academy. Yes, 𝐁𝐼THs Academy has come with yet another IELTS Listening Live to help you with your listening. So how are you all doing? Like I say, we come in the weekend, so you must be all relaxing and doing not doing anything, just relaxing. Or some of you might be doing something. Okay, whatever it be, I tell you, we don't have weekends, we don't have holidays when it comes to exam preparation. If you're preparing for an exam, you even have to work on it. You have to work on it even on holidays or when you have off days, because you shouldn't lose the touch that you have with the material, and especially when it is a language test, it's very important that you keep working towards it. It's not that I'm asking you to do like you would do on your weekdays, but on weekends, make sure you do something related to it. If it's an IELTS listening, try to do at least one section, or like what we are showing here, just go for one section and do it, and then leave it aside. Then do whatever you want to do the rest of the day. I always tell this because it's very important that you consistently practice. And also, if you take a complete break from these things for 2 days, when you come on Monday, it would be really hard for you to just get back to things. Okay, so it's really important that you keep practicing. And about IELTS listening, I've told you, one test will have almost 4 sections. Not almost 4 sections. One test has got 4 sections. Section 1, Section 2, Section 3, and Section 4. Section 1 is the easiest. Then comes Section 2. That's also easy. Section 3 becomes a bit difficult. And Section 4 becomes the toughest. Because in Section 4, you have to read all the 10 questions within the 30 seconds time given to you. So in Section 1 and all, you are given some time to read questions 1 to 5, then questions 6 to 10. So that's how the timing is coming. But here, it's very different. You have to read all these 10 questions within 30 seconds time given to you, which is not quite easy for a lot of students. So it's very important that you work on your reading speed. And I have students telling me that I'm not able to finish reading questions within the time given to me. And if you don't read the questions, you wouldn't be able to answer the questions properly. So it's always important that you read the questions. But you know that, it's important that you finish reading the questions within the time given to you, so that you'll be able to answer the questions properly. But what's stopping you from that? It's just that you don't know, you're not able to do it. So I can tell you what can help you read the questions really quick. So firstly, what is important there when you're reading the question? What do you want? You need to have good reading speed. And reading speed is something that you have to work on if you're preparing for a language test like IELTS, because you have your reading module where reading speed is extremely important. So if you're investing time on improving your reading speed, that's going to help you with your reading and your IELTS listening as well. So that's why it's important that you work on it. And what all things can we do to improve reading? One of the most important things is that you have to read every day. Besides practicing these 4 modules that you're doing, make sure you take something and read it really quickly. So put a time span and try to finish reading it on time. Or you can use the reading passages that you have in your Cambridge IELTS book, the same passages you can use. And you can try to read it within 10 minutes. So the 20 minutes passage, you can try your best to finish reading it within 10 minutes. So every day you set a goal and you decide you'll finish reading it in this much time. And you set a timer and see how long you took to finish reading it. So, and then decide how much more you have to work on that to improve your reading speed. Or you just set a goal every day. So if today you were able to, your goal is to finish reading it in 10 minutes, the 20 minutes passage. And today when you read, you took 22 minutes. So tomorrow your aim would be to make it to 20. Then for a week you would be finish reading it within 20 minutes. Then you would reduce it. You would set your goal to 17, then 16, then 14, then 13, then 10. That way you will reduce the time you're taking for it. So how will you improve your reading speed? Try to read as many words as possible. So when you're reading something, you're not just reading one particular word, but make sure you're able to read at least 3 words together. And then use your peripheral vision to have a look at the other 2 words. So total 5 words you're covering at one look. And then you're moving on to the next 5 words. So 5 words, most we would say a sentence has got an average of 5 words. So that means you're covering one sentence in one look. This is how you can improve it. Another important point is that always read in your mind. A lot of students are not able to finish reading the questions within the time given to you because they read it out loud. I think I've mentioned it in other lives as well, in the previous lives as well, that don't ever do that, okay? Even after reading it out loud or even after making the lip movements, if you're able to finish it, good for you. But that does not always happen. If you try to pronounce each word that you're seeing there, or if you are making lip movements, you wouldn't be able to finish reading the questions on time. Trust me, I'm telling you this, because you might think you're reading in the brain, reading in the mind, but you're actually making movements. So that is taking up a lot of your time. That is slowing you down. So make sure when you're reading something, you're reading it in your mind. You have it all in your mind and you're reading it. That works really well, okay? And another thing that you can do is use a pencil or your finger or whatever. So you use it to go through the letters or the words, okay, to run through the words. So as you move your finger or as you move the pencil, you're going along those words. So you're moving it really fast, okay? So then you will be able to follow those words and you wouldn't be confused. Another thing that you have to notice, students have this tendency, when they're reading questions, they want to understand it completely. It's not that they're trying to read it, okay, just to have a basic understanding. They try to have an in-depth knowledge about what is written there. They spend a lot of time on one particular sentence if they don't understand it or not. See, it's not worth the effort. Okay, you quickly go through it. Of course, you should try to understand what's written there. You don't need to have a deep knowledge about it. No, you don't. You just have to know what the words are, what that sentence is all about, and this audio would be on topic that you have no idea about. So it's important that you quickly read it and you are not being carried away by the fact that you don't get some words. And of course, there might be words that you don't know and you don't get at all. Just ignore it, move on to the next one, because there's no way you can Google it and find the meaning or go to a dictionary and find the meaning. So all that you can do is just move on. So that part is also very important and you have to be careful about it. And in today's section 4, what we have is, we have 3 questions, and these 3 questions, we have 10 questions, but out of these 10 questions, 3 questions are multiple choice questions. So you'll have a question and then you'll be given 3 options. So understand, reading these options is very important. Okay, and underlining the keywords. When you read it, make sure you underline the keywords. What are these keywords? Keywords are the nouns, verbs, and adjectives. Why am I asking you to underline the keywords? When the audio is being played, you wouldn't have time to read the whole option. So you might have to look at, okay, are they talking about this option or are they saying about this? So if you have to look at it like that, you first need to know the keywords of it. If you've underlined the keywords, you can just look at the keywords and feel like, okay, this is the point they're talking about, or this is not the point they're talking about. You don't have to read the whole sentence. That saves you time and that helps you keep track of your audio. Okay, and another mistake is that you will mark the answer on your question paper booklet. When multiple choice questions come, students make this mistake most of the time. When they copy the answer to their answer sheet, what they do is they write that option. So here you may not make that mistake because the options are really long, so you wouldn't take the effort to write it. But if the options are very small, what students do, they tend to write that option itself. There you will lose marks. Make sure you write the options like A, B or C. And after that, you have filling the blanks. So filling the blanks also, then in every place they're giving you some instructions, how many words your answers should be. So that you should keep in your mind, and you should read the question. So that is also not very difficult. The remaining questions are really easy. So you should get a minimum of 7 to 8. Minimum. I'm telling the minimum. That should be the answer, because if you're making mistakes with those 3 questions, you should be able to manage it with the remaining. So now I'll tell you the drill, and most of you might already know what we usually do in IELTS listening Acuity, that I play an audio, and the questions will be displayed on the screen. What you do is you follow the instructions in the audio and you write the answers. Okay, so the audio will be played, and you'll also be able to see the questions on the screen, and after that you'll write the answers. And after that, we will be discussing the answers with the help of audio script. And I've told you why I'm doing that, because you'll be able to have an idea about each and every word, okay, that is said in the audio. And you can also use it to see if you've actually understood what was said in the audio. And I've also marked the answers in the audio script, so that in future, if you want to go through these materials once again, these materials will be available on Neetu's page, and you can refer them. You can see, okay, how did this become the answer? You will also get the explanation for it, and I will be giving the explanations to all that. All right, yes. So now I think, without wasting much time, let's move on to the business, listening to the audio and writing the answers. Now the audio will be played and questions will be displayed on the screen.
Section 4. You will hear a lecturer talking about farming in ancient Ireland. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. Last week we were looking at the hunter-gatherers in Ireland, across the Irish Sea from England. Today we're going to move on to the period between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago, known as the Neolithic period, which is when a total farming economy was introduced in Ireland. Now, there are several hypotheses about the origins of the first Neolithic settlers in Ireland, but most of these contain problems. For instance, there are considerable archaeological difficulties about the theory that they came from England. The evidence doesn't really add up. But there are even greater practical problems about the theory that they came directly from continental Europe. For one thing, it's not clear just how sufficient numbers of men and women could have been transported to Ireland to establish a viable population. As you know, the hunter-gatherer economy which existed beforehand was based on small, scattered groups. The farming economy would almost certainly have required much larger communities to do all the work needed to plant and tend sufficient crops to sustain them through the year. The early farmers kept various animals, including cattle and sheep. There's also evidence of pigs, but it is possible that these could have been descended from the native wild species. Now, we know from modern farming that if the level of breeding stock falls below about 300 females, the future of the species locally is at risk. So we must assume that from the beginnings of Neolithic farming, the number of breeding sheep would have considerably exceeded 300. And the national cattle herd must have been of a similar size. The question is how these were brought to the area and where they came from. It's usually suggested that the Neolithic settlers used skin-covered boats to transport livestock, but this method would have severely restricted the range of the colonizing fleets. The sheer volume of animal transport necessary means it's unlikely that this livestock could have been brought from anywhere further than England. What about crops? Well, two main cereal crops were introduced to Ireland during this time, wheat and barley, both in several varieties. The main evidence for their presence consists of impressions on pottery, where a cereal grain accidentally became embedded in the surface of a pot before it was fired. The grain itself was destroyed by the firing, but it left an impression on the pot which could be studied and identified by botanists. Let's turn our attention now to the farming technology available at that time. Before the cereal crops could be planted, it would have been necessary to clear the forest and to break the ground by ploughing. The stone blade of a plough has been discovered during excavation in County Mayo in Western Ireland. The body of the plough would have been of wood and could have been drawn by people, but it's also likely that cattle were used. Now, the cultivation of crops and the husbandry of livestock brought about changes in people's lifestyle, such as the type of shelters they made. For one thing, instead of moving from place to place, they needed permanent dwellings. The stone axes used to chop down trees to make these dwellings were far superior to any that the Stone Age hunter-gatherers used. To make the axes, sources of suitable stone had to be found and systematically exploited. These so-called axe factories were really quarries rather than factories, as the manufacture of the axes wasn't regularly performed on the quarry site. However, after the axe had been chipped into shape, they needed water and sand for grinding and polishing, so a high mountainside wouldn't have been an appropriate place for this. So this final stage of the manufacture must have been carried out close to water, and sure enough, there's ample evidence of this at coastal sites. Now, it's clear that these Neolithic axes were transported all over Ireland, as well as to Scotland and the south of England. It's not really surprising that axes from axe factories in England have also been found in Ireland. At the very least, this indicates that there was a link between the two islands during that period. One of the most useful innovations of the colonizers was pottery making, which was quite unknown to Irish hunter-gatherers. The pottery was probably made by shaping clay into a ball with the hand, and then hollowing it until the walls were the right thickness. After firing, the outside was often polished. This would have helped the pots to retain water, as they weren't glazed. Now, we know that the clay used usually came from local sources, which suggests that manufacture was on a fairly small scale, even though thousands of fragments are usually found at Neolithic sites. In the course of time, decoration began to appear. At first, this looked like a series of stitches and was just around the tops of the pots. This could have been an imitation of earlier vessels, which were made of leather sewn onto wood. Then, eventually, pots with decoration all over.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Okay, so did you try the material? Was it easy? I know it's section 4 and you only get 30 seconds to read the questions, but if we are practicing or the whole material like section 1, 2, 3 and 4 together, we'll effectively get 1 minute. I've told you how, because section 3 right after it's over, they'll give you 30 seconds to check your answers. So you won't use that time to check the answers of section 3, rather you would use it for reading the questions of section 4. And after that time is over, they'll be giving you 30 seconds for you to read the questions of section 4. So that 30 seconds plus the 30 seconds for section 4 together, that makes up 1 minute. So you will be effectively getting 1 minute to read the questions. But when you practice, it's always good that you try to finish reading these 10 questions within 30 seconds. So that might have been a bit of a problem for some of you, I guess. And if that has been a problem for you, make sure you work on your reading speed. Okay, so now I'll give you some time to take a screenshot of the questions, or you can copy them down. If you're using your phone, these questions may not be very clear to you. I mean, it would be if you tilt your phone. Then if you keep your phone horizontally, you'll be able to see all the questions properly. But if you want, you can also copy them down onto your book, or you can take a screenshot of it on another device, so that when I discuss, you will be able to look through, cross-check it. Okay, so questions 31, so I'll read it for you now. Questions 31 to 40. Questions 31 to 34. Choose the correct letter, A, B, or C. That means in the answer sheet, you'll be writing either A, B, or C. Don't draw the picture. Just move on to question number 31. According to the speaker, it is not clear. Option A, right, when the farming economy was introduced to Ireland. So what will be the keywords? Speaker, not clear, when farming economy introduced to Ireland. B, why people began to farm in Ireland. Why people began farm in Ireland. Option C, where the early Irish farmers came from. Where Irish farmers came from. Question number 32. What point does the speaker make about? What point does the speaker make about breeding animals in Neolithic Ireland? Option A, the numbers must have been a certain level. Option B, they were under threat from wild animals. Option C, some species died out during this period. Question number 33. What does the speaker say about the transportation of animals? Option A, livestock would have limited the distance the farmers could sail. Option B, Neolithic boats were too primitive to have been used. Option C, probably only a few breeding animals were imported. Question number 34. What is the main evidence for cereal crops in Neolithic Ireland? Option A, the remains of burnt grain in pots. Option B, the marks left on pots by grains. Option C, the patterns painted on the surface of pots. Now question number 35 to 40. Complete the sentences below. Write no more than 2 words for each answer. stone tools. 35. Plows could either have been pulled by dash or by cattle. The farmers needed homes which were permanent dwellings. 36. In the final stages of axe making, dash and dash were necessary for grinding and polishing. 37. Irish axes were exported from Ireland to dash and England. Next heading, right? Pottery making. The colonizers used clay to make pots. Question number 38. The dash of the pots was often polished to make them watertight. Question number 39. Clay from dash areas was generally used. 40. Decoration was only put around the dash of the earliest pots. All right. So I hope these questions are clear. We had a quick read through all the questions, and so those of you who wanted to copy, I hope you've copied down the questions. Okay. So now let's look at question number 31 to 34. Choose the correct letter A, B, or C. So we have to write A, B, or C. Ireland in the Neolithic period, that is the picture given. Now, question number 31. According to the speaker, it is not clear when the farming economy was introduced. So, speaker, it is not clear. Speaker, not clear when farming economy was introduced to Ireland. Why people began farm in Ireland? Where the earliest farmers came from? This is how you underline the keyword, so that when the audio is being played, you know what each point is. You just have to look at the underlined words. You only have to read the underlined words. Okay, see, when farming economy introduced to Ireland, why farm in Ireland, where the early farmers came from. Okay, let's look at the audio. Now turn to section 4. Section 4, you'll hear a lecturer talking about farming in ancient Ireland. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40. Good morning, everyone. Last week we were looking at the hunter-gatherers in Ireland across the Irish Sea from England. Today we're going to move on to the period between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago, known as the Neolithic period, which is when total farming economy was introduced in Ireland. So it is given, the speaker is not clear about when the farm began in Ireland, but they're saying they know it is between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago. The total farming economy was introduced in Ireland, so we can eliminate that option. Like when the farming began, that can be eliminated. Now look at next part. Now there are several hypotheses. What is hypothesis? It's an assumption, an idea that is proposed for the sake of argument, an idea that is said, and now if it has to be proved, some other studies have to be done. It can be tested to see if it might be true. About the origins of, so there are certain hypotheses about the origins of the first Neolithic settlers in Ireland, but most of these contain problems. For instance, there are considerable archaeological difficulties about the theory that they came from England. The evidence doesn't really add up. So we have some archaeological difficulties about the theory that they're coming from England. So the evidence really doesn't add up. But there are even greater practical problems about that. They came directly from continental Europe. So when there are other people saying it came from continental Europe, but there are greater practical problems to it. So what is not clear, where they came from, that is not clear. So we'll look at the audio. We can see that when the farming economy was introduced to Ireland, so we know it was between 4,000 and 6,000. So we eliminated this option, right? Then why people began to farm in Ireland? They're not talking about it. Okay, so we eliminated that too. Where the Irish farmers came from, it could be from England, it could be from Europe. They don't have clear evidence for it. So option A is your answer. Option C, option C is your answer, where the early Irish farmers came from. Now question number 32. What point does the speaker make about breeding animals in Neolithic Ireland? Their numbers must have been above a certain level. They were under threat from wild animals. Some species died out during the period. Okay, let's look at the audio. For one thing, it's not clear just how sufficient numbers of men and women could have been transported to Ireland to establish a viable population. As you know, the hunter-gatherer economy, which existed beforehand, was based on small, scattered groups. The farming economy would almost certainly have required much larger communities to do all the work needed to plant and tend sufficient crops to sustain them throughout the year. The early farmers kept various animals, including cattle and sheep. There is also evidence of pigs, but it is possible that these could have been descended from native wild species. So let's look at the question. The question is asking breeding animals in Neolithic period. The numbers must have been about a certain level. They were under the threat from wild animals. Some species died out during the period. So nothing can be seen from what we have read so far. Now we know from the modern farming that if the level of breeding stock falls below about 300 males, the future of the species locally is at risk. So we must assume that from the beginnings of Neolithic farming, the number of breeding sheep would have considerably exceeded 300, and the national cattle herd must have been of similar size. So this point is very important. The breeding sheep would have considerably exceeded 30. It exceeded what? Certain number. Alright, so that matches with option A. The numbers must have been above a certain level. They were under the threat from wild animals. They're talking about wild species, but not that the breeding animals in the Neolithic period were under the threat from wild animals. That part we cannot see. Option C, some species died out during this period. That information is also unseen. Now, cannot be seen. So what does the speaker say about the transportation of animals? Next part is transportation of animals. Option A, livestock would have limited the distance the farmers could sail. Livestock limited distance farmers could sail. Neolithic boats were too primitive to have been used. Neolithic boats were too primitive to have been used. Probably only a few breeding animals were imported. So few breeding animals were imported. Okay, so let's see. The question is how these were brought to the area and where they came from. It's usually suggested that the Neolithic settlers used skin-covered boats to transport livestock. But this method, so they're talking about transportation of animals, but this method would have severely restricted the range of colonizing fleets What do you mean by colonizing fleets? Colonizing fleets means groups of ships or spacecraft organized and sent by a nation or organization, a group of people with intent to establish colonies in new territories. The sheer volume of animal transport necessary means it's unlikely that this livestock could have been brought through anywhere further than England. So that means what? This has actually restricted the range of colonizing fleets, and also this is was unlikely that this livestock could have been brought from anywhere further than England. So that matches with option A. Livestock would have been limited the distance. The livestock would have limited the distance the farmers could sail. Option A is the answer. Neolithic boats were too primitive to be used. We cannot see that part. Probably only a few breeding animals were important. That also we cannot see. We're eliminating those two options, and option A is your answer. Now question number 34. What is the main evidence for cereal crops in Neolithic Ireland? Evidence for cereal crops in Neolithic Ireland. Remains of, so here it could be a bit confusing. Remains of burned grain in pots. Okay, so try to understand it. Remains of burned grain in pots. Okay. Marks left on, so what is the difference between two? One is like marks. Option B is marks left on pots by grains. Okay. Now, in the option A, option B, what are they saying? Only marks is there. Option A, what are they saying? The remains are there. The burnt grains remains are there. Option C, the patterns painted on the surface of the pots. So evidence for the patterns painted on the surface of pots. So evidence for cereal crops in Neolithic period. Let's look at the audio. What about crops? Well, two main cereal crops were introduced to Ireland during this time. Wheat and barley, both in several varieties. The main evidence for their presence consists of the main evidence. So this indicated there was cereal evidence for their presence consists of impressions on the pottery where a cereal grain accidentally became embedded in the surface of a pot before it was fired. So what are you seeing? Are you seeing the remains of the grains on the pot or the marks? If you look at this, you can see that is very important. That is a minute difference. The evidence of the presence consists of impressions. Okay, impressions on pottery where a cereal grain accidentally became embedded in the surface. Okay, so this is impressions. Impressions means what? Marks. Okay, embedded in the surface of a pot before it was fired. Okay, so the impressions that were there on the pot before it was fired. So the grain was there, that left an impression on the pot. Okay, a grain accidentally became embedded in the surface of the pot before it was fired. So the grain itself was destroyed by the firing. So what happened? When it was fired, the grain was destroyed. You don't have the grain anymore. Okay, you don't have the grain anymore. The grain was destroyed. So you don't have the remains of grain by the firing, but it left an impression. It left an impression on the pot, which could be studied and identified by botanists. So which option do you think is the answer? Let me know in the comments. So the answer is option B. The marks left on pots by grains and not the remains of burnt grains in the pots. The burnt grains were actually the grain was actually destroyed in firing. Okay, they're not talking about the patterns painted on the surface of the pots, so that is also being eliminated. So that is the answer. I'll show that part once again. That could be a bit confusing for some of you. The main evidence for their presence consists of impressions on pottery where a cereal grain accidentally became embedded in the surface of a pot before it was fired, and the grain itself was destroyed by the firing, but it left an impression on the pot which could be studied and identified by botanists. Okay, now let's look at question number 35 to 40. Complete the sentences below. Write no more than 2 words for each answer. So 2 words for each answer. No more than 2 words. What do you mean by no more than 2 words? We've explained this in previous lives. So that means you can write 1 word like this. Okay? You can write 2 words like this. 1, then 2 words, not more than that. You can write 1 word, 2 word, no numbers, nothing. Stone tools. Question number 35. Plows could either have been pulled by dash or by cattle. Okay, let's see. Let's turn our attention now to the farming technology available at that time. Before the cereal crops could be planted, it would have been necessary to clear the forest and to break the ground by plowing. The stone blade of a plow has been discovered during excavation in County Mayo in Ireland, in Western Ireland. The body of the plow would have been of wood and could have been drawn by people, but it's also likely that cattle were used. So it could be drawn by dash and by cattle. What is the answer? People. Answer for 35th question is people. People. Now 36, in the final stages of, next some information is given. The farmers needed homes which were permanent dwellings. Question number 36, in the final stages of axe making, dash and dash were necessary for grinding and polishing. These one word answers are very simple. Okay, let's see. Now the cultivation of crops and the husbandry of livestock brought about changes in people's lifestyles, such as the type of shelters they made. For one thing, instead of moving from place to place, they needed permanent dwellings. The stone axes used to chop down trees to make these dwellings were far superior to any that the Stone Age hunter-gatherers used. To make the axes, sources of suitable stone had to be found and systematically exploited. These so-called axe factories were really quarries rather than factories, as the manufacture of these axes were regularly performed on the quarry site. However, after the axe had been chipped into shape, they needed water and sand for grinding and polishing. So what do they need for in the last stages of axe making? What do they need? Water and sand for grinding and polishing. So the high mountainside wouldn't have been an appropriate place for this. So this final stage of the manufacture must have been carried out close to water, and sure enough, there is ample evidence of this at coastal sites. So what is needed in the final stages of axe making? Sand and water. All right. So we'll write. So sand and water. Irish axes were exported. Question number 37. Irish axes were exported from Ireland to Dash and England. Okay, let's see. Now it's clear that these Neolithic axes were transported over Ireland as well as to Scotland. So they were transported all over Ireland. So from Ireland to Scotland and the south of England. So what is that place? Scotland. So right from Ireland to Scotland. Pottery making. The colonizers used clay to make pots. Question number 38. The dash of the pots were often polished to make them watertight. What if the pots were polished? Let's see. It's not really surprising that axes from axe factories in England have also been found in Ireland. At the very least, this indicates that there was a link between the two islands during that period. One of the most useful innovations of the colonizers was pottery making, which was quite unknown to Irish hunter-gatherers. The pottery was probably made by shaping clay into a ball and with the hand and then hollowing it until the walls were the right thickness. After firing, the outside was polished. What was done? This would have helped the pots to retain water as they were glazed. Glazed means the process of applying glassy coating on the surface of pottery. Okay, so what was done? The outside of the pots, the outside of the pots was often polished to make them watertight. Question number 39. Clay from dash areas was generally used. Clay from dash areas was generally used. After firing, so the outside was often polished. This would have helped the pots to retain water as they were glazed. Now we know that the clay used usually came from local sources, which suggests that manufacture was on a fairly small scale, even though the thousands of fragments are usually found at the Neolithic site. So the clay usually came from local sources. So question number 39, what is the answer? Clay from local areas was generally used. Question number 40. Decoration was only put around the dash of the earliest pots. So now we know that the clay was the clay used usually came from local sources, which suggests that manufacture was on a fairly small scale, even though thousands of fragments are usually found at the Neolithic sites. In the course of time, decoration began to appear. At the first, this looked like a series of stitches and was just around the tops of the pots. So decoration was done where? On the tops of the pots. This could have been an imitation of earlier vessels, which were made of leather sewn onto wood. Then eventually pots with decoration all over appeared. So where were the decorations given? Around the tops of the pots. So what is the answer? Tops. Okay, so now I'll show you the answers once again. C 31 to 34, C, A, A, B. 35 people, water and sand. Scotland, outside. Local, tops. All right. So I wrote sand and water. Here it is axe making, sand and water, or water sanding, but try to write in the same order. Water and sand. Okay. So 36th one is water and sand. Try to write it in the order that is given in the audio. And this is also fine. You may get, that is not a big problem. Sand and water, or water and sand. Any order would be fine actually. So, but always try to write in the order that is given in the audio. Alright. So, these are the answers. I hope it's clear to you. And make sure you practice this material once again and see if you're able to get full marks for this. We will come again with yet another IELTS listening live on next Saturday at 10 a.m. Till then, bye-bye. Take care and have a beautiful